Hello there, today we will look at a 2013 action-adventure game called The Last of Us, developed by Naughty Dog. Warning, spoilers ahead. The game begins in 2013 by introducing Joel, a single father living in Austin, Texas, with his 12-year-old daughter, Sarah. On the night of his birthday, a sudden outbreak of a very severe brain infection originating from an unknown fungus rapidly spreads throughout the United States. As Joel and Sarah meet up with his brother Tommy, they attempt to flee the area, and they encounter a lone soldier who is ordered to open fire on them. He does, and Joel and Sarah fall down a hill, separated from each other by only a few feet. When the soldier is about to execute Joel, he is shot in the head by Tommy. Joel survives the attack with minor injuries, but Sarah was fatally wounded and dies in Joel's arms. 20 years later, in the summer of 2033, Joel is now a smuggler in a bleak, post-apocalyptic society in the Boston quarantine zone, with his partner and friend, Tess, where they frequently sneak out of the city illegally to trade with other survivors. After coming back from a deal with another client, Tess explains to Joel that she was jumped on the way back from the deal by two men who had the intention to kill her. The two set out to look for a local arms dealer named Robert, who had stolen guns from them. When they find him, he confesses that he had sold the guns because he owed them to the Fireflies. Provoked by this revelation, Tess shoots Robert twice in the head, and the two decide to look for the Fireflies and explain what happened to retrieve their merchandise. Shortly after, they encounter Marlene, the head of the Fireflies, and she tells them that she will part with the guns and double the payment if they agree to smuggle something out of the city for her. Marlene takes them to a safe house and it's revealed that they will be smuggling a young girl by the name Ellie. Tess and Joel split up, with Tess following Marlene back to her camp to confirm that she has their payment, and Joel escorting Ellie back to their own safe house to wait for Tess. When Tess returns, the three of them set off for the drop-off point that other Fireflies will be waiting at to receive Ellie, at the Capitol building. Before they get far, however, two patrolling military members ambush them, and they are subject to a scan for CBI, Cordyceps brain infection, and they call for backup. Tess and Joel pass the CBI skin just fine, but before they get a look at Ellie's skin reading, Ellie panics, and she stabs the soldier with her switchblade. Going into combat, both Joel and Tess immediately kill both of them. It is then revealed that Ellie is infected, but Ellie claims that her bite is 3 weeks old, which is a unique condition as everyone turns within 2 days. Although still skeptical, the three escape together as backup arrives, and flee underground as soldiers pursue them. Once the soldiers lose track of them, Ellie explains that Marlene believes what happened to her may be the key to finding a cure. Joel is reluctant, but Tess believes there may be some truth to what she is saying and urges him to consider finishing the drop-off. The three fight their way through numerous infected to the Capitol building, only to find that the Fireflies that were supposed to meet them are slaughtered. Joel declares they tried and failed, and proposes they return home, but Tess reveals that she had been bitten on the way to the building. Tess begs Joel to bring Ellie to Tommy, as he used to be part of Marlene's group, and may have an idea of how to bring her to the Fireflies. Tess stays behind alone to cover them against the approaching soldiers, as Joel reluctantly flees with Ellie. Once they are in a safe spot and away from any infected, Joel tells Ellie to never bring Tess up, and to keep their histories to themselves. He also tells her to do what he says, when he says it. And Joel makes Ellie repeat it, and she does. The subject is then over. Joel tells his initial idea, which is to visit an acquaintance that owes him a favor and procure a working car from him, which would make their trip to Tommy's a lot easier and quicker. They acquire the ride, but is it cut short as they are ambushed and attacked by a group of hunters in Pittsburgh, forcing them to abandon the pickup truck and escape on foot. Within the hunter's city, they meet a pair of brothers named Sam and Henry who are also trying to escape, and they agree to work together. In a confrontation with more hunters, Sam and Henry abandon Ellie and Joel, and the two are once again alone. As they leave the city, the hunters continue to pursue them in the Humvee, chasing Joel and Ellie to the edge of a broken bridge. Ellie proposes that they jump off to escape. Joel doesn't want to because Ellie will drown because she can't swim. Ellie ignores him and jumps off, and angrily, Joel follows her. Once in the strong current, Joel latches onto Ellie, but before they could do anything, Joel is knocked unconscious by his head slamming into a boulder in the water. He then is woken up by Ellie on the shore of a beach, where they are reunited with Sam and Henry. Angered, Joel shoves Sam down to the ground and points a gun at him, threatening to shoot him because they chose to abandon Ellie and Joel. Henry then explains himself why they had to leave, and also says that they found Joel and Ellie in the water. Ellie says that they would have drowned if it wasn't for them. He puts the gun down and they all continue their journey to the radio tower. Soon, they find an entrance to a sewer and navigate through it to reach a suburban neighborhood. Once they reach the radio tower, they spend the night indoors, talking about past memories before the outbreak. Joel, Ellie, and Henry are all in the main room talking while Sam is in the other. Ellie goes into the other room and Henry is seen taking stock of the food that they have. Ellie notices that Sam is particularly upset, and they have a deep conversation of religion, becoming infected, and their roles in the world. After they talk, they both say goodnight and spend the night in the radio tower. They all wake up and Henry is making breakfast. Ellie decides to check on Sam for breakfast, only to discover that he had been bitten in their latest encounter with the infected and had turned overnight. He attacks Ellie and Joel goes to shoot Sam, but Henry shoots the gun out of his hand, concerned for his brother. A gunshot is heard and it turns out Henry shot Sam. Henry, in a state of anger and grief, blames Joel and points his gun at him. Joel tells him this is nobody's fault, but Henry changes his mind and shoots himself instead, ultimately committing suicide. Joel and Ellie continue their journey to find Tommy. They soon reach a closed gate, a dam, which is guarded by several armed people. As the woman interrogates Joel and Ellie, Tommy recognizes Joel and opens the gates for him. He introduces the woman as his wife Maria, and they all head inside. Once they are alone, Joel tells Tommy about Ellie and her unique condition. Joel proposes that Tommy finishes the job, and he collects the payment from Marlene. He refuses to help, and the two begin to quarrel. But their argument is cut short as a pack of bandits show up and attack their settlement. Joel and Tommy fight their way back to Maria and Ellie, and upon seeing his brother's apparent love for Ellie, Tommy makes up his mind and decides to help deliver Ellie to the Fireflies. He discusses this with Maria, who is evidently distraught and against their plan. Ellie listens in on the conversation and picks up that Joel is going to be handing her off to Tommy. Upset by this, she steals a horse and takes off into the woods alone. When Joel and Tommy learn of Ellie's disappearance, they each grab a horse and look for her together. They finally find her in an abandoned ranch house, where Ellie accuses Joel of planning to leave her with Tommy, and that he wanted to get rid of her the whole time. He argues that she would be safer with Tommy, and Ellie brings up Sarah, saying how she isn't her. This greatly upsets Joel and prompts him to say she's not her daughter and he ain't her dad as well. Before Ellie can respond, Tommy bursts into the room and tells them that bandits have invaded the house. They fight their way out of the ranch and start to head back to the dam on horseback. Joel thinks back to his argument with Ellie, and in a change of heart, he announces that he has decided to continue the journey with Ellie himself. He tells her to return the horse she took, and the two ride off together as they part ways with Tommy. Together, they head for the University of Eastern Colorado, as Tommy told them the Fireflies lab is located there. As they search the school buildings for the lab, it becomes increasingly obvious that the school had been abandoned for quite some time. When they finally find a recorder that tells them of the current whereabouts of the Fireflies, they are spotted by another group of survivors that start to attack them. And Joel is impaled through the stomach with a metal beam, which leaves him severely wounded and struggling to walk. A while later, Ellie looks back and declares that they're safe for now, but Joel is still severely wounded and bleeding and unable to hold on any longer. He falls unconscious from blood loss, leaving Ellie panicked and unsure of what to do. Ellie is out hunting in the snow by herself. She shoots a rabbit with an arrow before noticing a buck in the distance. She leaves the rabbit with Callus and follows it quietly. She manages to shoot it twice, following the blood trail to an abandoned shack, where the stag finally succumbed to its wounds. She is then approached by two men by the names of David and James, who offer to trade supplies with her. Ellie is extremely cautious and frantically asks them for some antibiotics, and James leaves to retrieve it as David stays with her. David attempts to befriend Ellie, but she is skeptical of his seemingly good nature and refuses to reveal any information about herself. She takes his rifle away from him while James retrieves the medicine. Before long, they hear infected approaching. David then pulls out a pistol and asks for his rifle back, but she says no. They then work together to fight them off. When they are safe from infected again, David reveals that the group of men who attacked her and Joel at the university were part of his group. Sensing that she is in trouble, Ellie reaches for her weapon, but finds that she is outnumbered, as James had returned with the antibiotics. David tells James to let her go and to give her the medicine, which he does. Ellie flees with Callus back to the garage of an abandoned house, where Joel is resting. He is still very weak and ill. She gives him the antibiotics and falls asleep next to him. When she wakes up, she discovers that David's group had tracked her down, and she has no choice but to leave Joel behind as she attempts to draw them away from him. Ellie escapes on foot, but David catches up to her and knocks her unconscious. Ellie wakes up in a cage, and the first thing she sees is James butchering a human body, which frightens her. David intends to recruit her into his cannibal group. Refusing, she escapes after killing James, but David corners her in a burning restaurant. Meanwhile, Joel recovers from his wounds and sets out to find Ellie. He reaches her just as she kills David with a machete, an act that traumatizes her, and Joel comforts her before they flee. In the spring, Joel and Ellie arrive in Salt Lake City. Ellie is rendered unconscious after almost drowning before they are captured by a Firefly patrol. In the hospital, Marlene tells Joel that Ellie is being prepared for surgery. In hope of producing a vaccine for the infection, the Fireflies must remove the infected portion of Ellie's brain, which will kill her. Unwilling to let Ellie die, Joel battles his way to the operating room, kills the lead surgeon, and carries the unconscious Ellie to the parking garage. He is confronted by Marlene, whom he shoots and kills to prevent the Fireflies from pursuing them. On the drive out of the city, when Ellie wakes up, Joel claims that the Fireflies had found many other immune people, but were unable to create a cure, and that they have stopped trying. On the outskirts of Tommy's settlement, Ellie expresses her survivor guilt. At her insistence, Joel swears his story about the Fireflies is true. And that is the end of part 1. Stay tuned for the part 2. Don't forget to like and hit the subscribe button, as it helps the channel a lot. Thanks and peace out.